Welcome, boys and girls, to a book I think you're going to like. The book is called The Broken Blade, and the author is Mr. William Durbin. He's a Minnesota author. So what I'd like you to do, please, is sit back, relax, find a comfortable spot, follow along with the book as I'm reading it to you, and we'll talk about it during Google Meets. So I hope you like A Broken Blade. Pierre woke to the sound of an axe. The thunk of the blade on the chopping block told him that his father was splitting dry pine. Now that it was spring, his mother let the fire die out during the warm part of the day. That meant she needed more kindling than she did during the winter. At 13 years of age, Pierre knew that he should be up and helping. It had been his job to keep the wood box filled since he was 10, but it was Saturday, and it felt good to lie in bed a few extra minutes. Besides, the heavy work was done, and he knew his father enjoyed making kindling. Chunk! Crack! The axe snapped down. Pierre closed his eyes. And imagined the splinters piling up on his father's feet. Chunk, crack. Pierre could see the blade biting into the knotty grain as his father gave the axe a quick twist. A splitting lick, he called it, to shave the wood clean and to keep the blade from burying itself in the chopping block. Chunk, crack. Pierre watched his father in his mind. Quick fingers rotated the piece and flicked free the instant before the axe fell. Chunk, crack, chunk. Despite the sharp cracking of the pine shearing off, there was a rhythm to the sound that made Pierre drowsy. He drifted back to sleep, and he dreamed of riding in an open carriage down a broad cobbled street bathed in green gold light. The air smelled of a polished leather and coal smoke and dew. Ahead, Pierre saw the river Seine and the towering cathedral of Notre Dame. Beyond the bright music of the clattering hooves, a boatman sang. Pierre listened, but he couldn't understand the song. He tilted his head to better hear the strange words. Just then, the shadow of an enormous bird arched out over the river. There was a dark croaking sound, followed by a human cry. Pierre jerked his head back. Sweet Mother of God! The voice groaned. Pierre's eyes opened wide, and for a moment he was lost between sleep and waking. Charles, his mother called from the kitchen. Are you all right? By the time Pierre pulled on his pants and ran out the door, Mother was already outside. Father sat cross-legged on the ground beside the chopping block, cradling his left hand in his right. The dark hair at his temples glistened with sweat. His mother bent to take one look and then stood up. Her cheeks were pale. Camille! She called back into the house to Pierre's older sister. Bring a towel, quickly! She turned to her son. Get the doctor, Pierre. You must get the doctor. But Pierre stood open-mouthed, staring at the bright blood that pumped from his father's half-severed thumb. Pierre! Mother shouted, cuffing his shoulder. Go now! The doctor! Pierre ran down the path toward the village of Lachine. As he sprinted down the trail, he thought of the blood at the annual fall slaughter. His head pounded with the ringing of the butcher's steel. He saw the blade flash and the blood and the fire-blackened kettle. He smelled the stubbly hides that hung, scraped and stinking against the barn wall each November. Reaching Dr. Gallard's house, Pierre pounded on a heavy door. Doctor, he gasped. Dr. Gallard! When the door swung open, Pierre froze. It was Dr. Gallard's daughter, Celeste. Her fine black hair hung loosely over a white shawl. Tall and graceful, Celeste was the prettiest girl at his class at school. She and Pierre had often played together when they were little. Hiking in the woods beyond Pierre's house, they'd picked flowers for their mothers and played hide and seek. Hide and seek with friends. Sometimes they've pushed each other on the swing that Pierre's father had tied to a huge oak tree behind the woodshed. If they pumped extra hard, they could swing high enough to glimpse a tall church spire in Montreal. But in the past few years, Celeste had been too busy to spend time with Pierre or any of the other village boys. Every Saturday, private tutors came to teach her piano and dance and other skills deemed by her mother to be appropriate for a young lady. Though she and Pierre were the same age, Celeste suddenly seemed older. Pierre looked into her pale blue eyes and he blushed. He lowered his head. "There's been an accident." "Papa!" Celeste called down the hallway. Dr. Gillard appeared, his breakfast napkin in hand. "What is it, son?" My father cut bad an axe." The doctor turned and reached for his frock coat and bag. "Settle down," he said. "Everything will be all right." Pierre tried to help the doctor saddle his horse, but Gillard pushed him aside. He pulled the cinch cord tight, tied his bag to the saddle bow, and was off, the tails of his coat flying up behind. Long after the doctor was out of sight, Pierre could hear his instrument bag bouncing and rattling. Starting up the trail at a jog, Pierre was suddenly angry with himself. The kindling was his job. He should have swung that axe. His own thumb should be chopped to a bloody stub. Yikes. He wondered how his family would survive if Father couldn't work. You see, each spring, Father signed on as a voyageur for a company called the Northwest Company. But Pierre knew that no canoe brigade would hire a crippled steersman. See, a steersman is a gentleman who sits in the back of a big 36 to 40 foot long Montreal canoe. And his job as a steersman is to obviously steer the canoe. Pretty hard to do if you don't have an opposable thumb. So the closer Pierre got to home, the more slowly he walked. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, just out of sight of the house, and looked across the greening valley. "Make him be all right," he whispered, half in prayer. By the time Pierre reached home, Dr. Gillard had finished dressing Father's wound and was talking with Mother in the kitchen. "I am sorry, Madame," he said, "but when the bone is cut through, there is so little we can do." Pierre's heart went cold. Would his father die? He ran back to the back bedroom. As he threw open the door, Camille jumped up from her bedside chair and waved to him to be quiet. Father groaned, "What's that?" and turned his head toward the door. He was pale. His forehead was beaded with sweat, and his eyes were half open. The room smelled of blackberry brandy. "Hey, Pierre," he whispered, pausing to take in a shallow breath. "I'm glad you're back. You took so long." Pierre resolved to be brave, but when he saw the blood-stained bandage on his father's hand lying there upon his father's chest, he started to cry, even though he knew it was the worst thing he could do. All right, so what do we got here? So we got a 13-year-old kid supposed to be chopping the wood for his family. What's he doing instead? Catching some Z's. So his old man, his dad, is left to go ahead and do his chores for him. What happens to Dad? Almost chops his thumb off. And Pierre runs and gets help. And what's he do? His brains turn to mush when his hot-looking girl opens the door. and he doesn't know what to do. All right, so we got a 13-year-old kid here. We're going to see what his story is and see what he does to fix his mistake. This is the end of Chapter 1 of Broken Blade. Stay tuned, boys and girls. Chapter 2 is coming up soon.